Today I wanted to talk about a topic that's in education, and actually I talk about it a little bit in Revealing School, and that is, what should kids be reading? Obviously books. Hey Cassie, how you doing? Obviously books are part of an education, an elite education, educating kids for greatness. If you've read the books, it's not everything. I don't want you to think of your kids' education as merely a tall stack of books. That's not what education is. Education is everything that you're teaching and preparing your children for. A lot of that's going to happen outside of the classroom and outside of books. But of course, books are central. Books are how wisdom has been passed down. You know, a few thousand years ago, we didn't have videos and tape recorders. So the only way that you had this wise guy, he's full of wisdom, the only way you could pass his knowledge down was through the written language, books. So that's how it's been passed down. Obviously, like the Bible, what a great book. And it's been passed down through the written word. So reading is essential to a great education, but it's not everything, but it is essential. The problem is in the public school system, and it's kind of become a habit, even among the homeschooling world, is that we just need to get kids reading books. Just read books, and the more you read, the better. And you'll have kids that just spend all day, I think they're wasting their day sometimes. They're reading too much, and they're just sitting there reading books all day, absorbed, and we're not paying any attention to what they're reading because we're just happy that they're reading. We think that somehow that's inherently good. But reading can be in bad too, right? Not everything that's passed down, that's been written, is wisdom. Some of it's foolishness. So not every book is worth reading. We live in a time where back a few thousand years ago, it was hard to write a book. So they just wrote the classics. When they wrote a book and they published it, and it had to be hand copied, it was super expensive. I mean, books could cost as much as a house. So only really rich people could afford it. That's why Alexander was real famous for the library he started in Egypt. Books were so valuable. Most people didn't have access to them. So they didn't write silly books. I mean, they wrote the classics. They wrote great works of history, great works of literature, and that's pretty much it. Today, books are cheap. They're a dime a dozen. Anybody can publish a book. It costs nothing. You can actually publish books print on demand, which means you could publish your book, put it on Amazon. If you never sell a copy, that's okay. Your book is still out there. You could sell 1 or 2 copies, which means everybody's writing books. Everybody's putting out there. We have more books than you could ever read in a lifetime. And we need to be able to filter those because not every book is worth reading. 1, 2 of them. Second thing is, it's not just about reading in general. It's about reading good books. And when I say that, I mean, there are some books, like let's say the Goose Bumps series that was really popular when I was a kid. There was probably like 50 or 100 Goose Bump books. I read a whole bunch of them. And in one sense, they might increase your vocabulary or your creative writing skills or something. Not too much, but mostly they're just entertainment. And I don't think there's necessarily anything, there is something wrong with Goose Bumps, but there's not necessarily anything wrong with kids just reading fantasy books for fun or something like that. I suppose there might be a little bit of educational value, but we should see those as kind of like TV. They're really just entertainment. It's probably a little higher form than TV, but it's entertainment. You're not gleaning a whole lot of wisdom from the Goose Bump books. But too many parents think that that's okay, that as long as their kids are reading something, that's something that they should encourage. Well, if you're raising your kids for greatness, we only have so much time. Like I said, there's more books than they could ever possibly read. We want to encourage them to read, but we want to go a step farther. We want to encourage them to read good books. It's just a slight difference, but it makes a huge difference as far as their education goes. So, what is a good book? Well, there are lots of entertaining books. We'd say that they're good entertainment. I think Goose Bumps is probably well written. It's probably an entertaining book, but you're not gleaning any of that wisdom, which is why books were originally written and passed down. You're not gleaning any extra wisdom. So when we say good books, we want to read books mainly that reinforce our life goals, which are faith, family, finances, and fitness. And of course, some books, when we say fitness, is going to be their occupation. So there are certain books that your kids might read that are just tailored to maybe the career path that they want. But that's what I mean by good books. Good books should be books that are useful, that are going to enhance the life we're trying to provide for our children in the future. And those 4 things that are most important, I'd say the 2 most important is faith, our families. So we should be reading books that reinforce the family values and the faith that we want our children to have. First and foremost, also finances. Kids need to make a living. That's a big part of their education. They're going to be a mother and father, and Part of being a mother and father and family and faith even is making money. You need to be able to support your church, your ministers. So that's money. And then family, you got to feed your kids. You got to have a house for them. You got to pay for their education. So all of that stuff is absolutely important. So we want to be reading books too that promote that. And there's a lot of garbage out there that's going to promote a secular worldview where it's teenagers blowing their money and partying and just garbage. It's actually going to chip away. So not only is it not educational, it's not just a waste of time, it's actually destructive. It's promoting a destructive worldview. So that's what I mean by good books. Okay. Now, if you have read education, I actually say something a little bit different too. I say that kids should be reading the classics. And I said that some of the classics are dangerous. And so I'm gonna tell you, okay, so we have two categories. We have great books, powerful books. Some of them are dangerous that all kids need to read, not in an early age, when they are ready for it. And I stand by that. So it doesn't mean that we just filter out every bad book so kids just kind of grow up in this hokey little land of, kind of really, the Christian, most of the Christian books these days, just kind of like hokey, fun, but we avoid the dangerous classics. We don't want to do that. So when I say good books, are primarily we want books that do reinforce our faith and our family values. But when our kids come of age, we do want to touch the classics. Part of a great education is wrestling with the classics. A lot of the classics are going to be dangerous. They're hostile to our worldview. If you look up the list of classics, many of them are super biased. They're formed by leftists, those lists. So there are great Christian books out there that you've never heard of that should be classics. They're not on the list because the leftists could pretty much control the universities, the schools, the publishing houses, the media, pretty much everything throughout the world. I'll talk about how that happened someday. I'll give you that history. Very fascinating. So classics. Why should kids be reading classics? You have a guy like Voltaire. Voltaire was an enemy of the church. He wrote filth. Some of it is pornographic. But why would you want your kids to read something like Candide, a classic book? Why is that part of a great education, even though it's dangerous? His books were revolutionary in turning Europe against the Christian church and in creating kind of like this radical atheism that we see today. Like he is probably the father of modern antagonistic atheism. So why would we want our kids to do that? Well, I would say it's like a snake in the grass. There's two ways to deal with the snake. You can keep your kids indoors all day, all the time, if you know that there's a snake out there in that tall grass. And for a while, when they're really young, you're going to have to. That snake is so dangerous. But when your kids get older and they have their own families, they can't stay indoors all day. They're going to have to go out and do battle with that snake. We had a rattlesnake on the porch the other day. Actually, I've killed 3 rattlesnakes since I moved to the farm in Fairfield. There must be a nest around here. One I almost stepped on. One my daughter almost stepped on. And one I put my, it's been scary. But one day my daughter was running down the porch. She was getting on her bike and the rattlesnake was right under her bike, just jumped up, kind of went backwards. Well, eventually our kids are going to be leading homes. They're going to have to know how to kill a rattlesnake to keep their kids safe. They can't just hide away in their house all day. So I went and got the gun and we shot the rattlesnake. That's the best way to deal with it. You can't avoid it. If you know a rattlesnake's out there, eventually you might step on it. And then it's too late. It's gonna bite you. So you have to seek that rattlesnake out and kill it, eliminate it. That's how I see some of these classics like Voltaire. I want my kids to know who Voltaire is. I don't want to read some watered down version. Too often you'll read some kind of watered down version where they attack Voltaire and say he said these ridiculous things. No, he said some powerful things. He said some true things. And our kids need to see the real thing. They need to be able to take his strongest arguments in its purest form, do battle with it and defeat it so that they can go on with life. Because eventually the strongest arguments will be presented. And if you read some watered down version, your kid's going to look at you and be like, well, that's not what my mom said about Voltaire and atheism and all this stuff. And boy, it's actually a kind of a reasonable argument. And they can get hooked and then drawn away from their faith and their family, those values that they have. So we want to seek out the bad books. We want to be able to do battle with those ideas while they're in our home, while we can mentor them and we can guide them. I hope that makes sense. I'm going to give you some examples of some books that are classics that my kids, I want them to read at some point, to struggle with them. I definitely don't want these classics to conquer my kids intellectually, so I'm going to be there as a parent to carefully guide them and advise them. I'm not one of those parents that there's a free fall and hey, just read the books and form your own worldview. I don't want them to be seduced by evil, but that's why I want to seek it out and do battle while they're under my authority, my roof, and I can protect them. Okay, so that's one thing. So, classics. what are some good classic books that kids read? Oh, by the way, the reason I'm talking about good books today is I stumbled on them. And when I say that the leftists control pretty much all of the media, all the newspapers, they control all the universities, they control all of the public schools. I think you already know that. You probably don't know how this happened. That is a fascinating story. And it's been in the works for about 300 years. And it's an international conspiracy. And I know you're not supposed to believe in that because the media has conditioned you that if something sounds conspiratorial, it couldn't be true. You read history, you study history for 5 minutes, you realize history is a string of conspiracies. So it's very interesting. Let's talk for another day. The fact is that they pretty much run everything. So when I was going out looking for classic, great books for your kids for Blue Manor, very hard to find them. You'd find these great lists. You'd see something like Catcher in the Rye, and you'd think, oh, this is probably a good book. Like, everybody agrees it's a great classic book. They read it in the public schools. Then you read the book, and you're like, oh, now I get it. Now I know why it's on that list. It is a classic. It's well written, but it definitely promotes a worldview and agenda that they like. And that's true of almost all of the famous classics, from Jane Austen to Candid, even no, I don't forget his name. He wrote The Black Tulip, which I love, by the way. Great book. He also wrote The Three Musketeers and some other ones. Alexander Dumas, I believe is his, but great author. But even him, there's a reason that he's on those classic lists. And I'm starting to discover that this is rigged. The classics, the traditional classics, all those books are rigged. They're picked by leftists for a reason. So you got to be really careful. Don't just advise another one, 1984. Every conservatives and liberals love that book, 1984. They both think he's in your camp. I don't know how many good conservative Christians thinks George Orwell was on their side. George Orwell was a communist, okay? He did break with Stalinism, and there's a reason the leftists broke with Stalinism. That's another fun story. It certainly wasn't because he was a communist. That's not why they hate Stalin, okay? But 1984 was written by a socialist communist. He fought in the Spanish Civil War on the side of the communists, the socialists, as they called them then, but of course we know they were just communists. So 1984, that's not your ally. In fact, if you read Animal Farm, the other day, I'm like, I should probably get my daughter reading Animal Farm so she knows about the evil of communism. Well, the book starts off with a hit on the church. And it's about this raven who believes in the sky god and everything. And you're reading like, oh, okay. And he's a rabid, George Orwell is a rabid atheist and pretty much hated the church as much as he hated capitalists and the Stalinistic version of communism. So he's not our ally. George Orwell is not our ally. He is one of theirs. And your kids should read the book. It doesn't mean they dismiss everything. Like, there are some truths in 1984. There's some truths. I love 1984. There are some truths in Animal Farm that George Orwell wrote, but there are also some dangerous untruths. So it doesn't mean we throw away the book. It means we wrestle with it, we read with it and say, okay, what did he say that's true here? What is not true here? And we wrestle with that. I would say the same thing with Candid by Voltaire. Voltaire is a great atheistic writer. Some of his criticism and hypocrisy of the church, sure, like we can read that, we can analyze it, but there are other things he says that are just preposterous, and we can wrestle with that and deal with that. So that's a classic. 1984. But in other words, don't just hand your kids over 1984 like, oh, he's a conservative, so he's certainly not a Christian. He might be. He's not a conservative, by the way. He's a socialist. He's a leftist. He's just not. He wasn't a Stalinistic leftist, and because he criticized Stalin and Hitler, we think, oh, he's on our side. He's not. Okay. So that's some. Okay, so I want to go over a few with you, just classics that I read. This is actually for my job. When I tried out for the Army Special Forces, the Green Berets, Ranger Handbook, this was so enlightening to me. Okay, first of all, it's a classic within my occupation, my career. So that's why I was reading it. I'm not recommending your kids read it. But what I found struck me, the cool thing about going back to classes is you start to see the worldview back then. You see it from an original source, not through the filters of today. Like, all of history that you believe that you learn in public school has been filtered and twisted and is so biased. But what struck me about this book, and the only reason I'm mentioning it is, it's written by Robert Roger, okay? They're still using it today. Now, they've expanded on it. There's tons of stuff. We have automatic weapons and grenade launchers. Robert Roger wrote this book before the American Revolution. And here's why it struck me. Robert Rogers was a British soldier. He was a British officer. He wrote the handbook we're still using today on unconventional warfare. And I don't know about you, but when I was in public school, they taught me that that we defeated the great British military because we were a bunch of patriots that used guerrilla tactics, and the British just marched down the road with their red uniforms, and we were hiding behind bushes using the tactics that the Indians used, even though the British already defeated the Indians. And we had superior guerrilla tactics, and that's how we defeated. It was a David and Goliath story. No, it wasn't. No, that's false history. And the reason I know that is because, again, here is the handbook that we still use today, the Army Ranger handbook, and most special forces, special operations forces. So Green Berets, Navy SEAL stuff, they're still going to read this book. This book was written in, I think it was 1757, so before the Revolutionary War, by a British officer. They understood guerrilla warfare, conventional warfare. They understood it. They wrote the manual. So that's a myth that's been perpetuated. It was not a David and Goliath story. And that made me start to question things. And then you go back and you read the true history of the revolution. You're like, oh, okay. It wasn't a handful of patriots. That makes us feel good to think that, just our superior calling and vision and tactics, we outsmarted the British. Not quite. Like, they had the French were very much involved in it. The French funded our revolution. They sent soldiers over here. They had the Navy. The Navy's what defeated them. There's a famous painting I keep telling people. This just shocked me. I'm writing curriculum for Blue Manor. I'm trying to find a painting to support where, the British surrender to the Americans. But I find this painting and George Washington's like a nobody in the background, just like sitting on his horse in the background. And there's these two other people. The British are surrendering to this other guy. I don't know who he is. I start researching. I'm like, oh, the British didn't surrender to the Americans. Oh my gosh, they surrendered to the French. But why? Like, I thought we did all the fighting. I thought French were just like a minor role. Oh, oops. Okay, anyway. I'm not recommending that Ranger Handbook is a classic for your kids unless they want to go into the military. I just thought it was interesting that kind of by going back and studying the history, I was like, wait, this worldview that's been taught to me, it's not true. I wish it was true. It'd be so much cool if it was a David and Goliath story, but it's not quite actually a David and Goliath story like we want it to be. Actually, the American colonists were well funded by international bankers and absolutely funded by the French. It's a really interesting story. And you think, well, why would Louis fund the American colonies? Louis didn't want to fund it. But you're like, wait, he's the king of France. He doesn't want to fund it. So who in France is running things if it's not King Louis? What's the people who are going to kill him? Those people funded our revolution. That's fascinating. Way more interesting. Okay, that's done. I ramble. Another great book. This is a great one. This is War and Peace. This is a great book. I wish I read Russian. I wish I could read it in the original Russian. I hate translations. I think so much is lost in translation. It's still a fantastic book. It's going to introduce you to the French Revolution, Freemasonry, the influence of Freemasonry, which people don't understand how powerful that was. It's going to introduce you to kind of the view of the monarchy versus Napoleon, who represents the New World Order and republicanism and stuff. Very fascinating book, well written. Every kid should read it. I don't think this is too dangerous. There's definitely some like enlightenment ideas in here that might be, but it's a great book. Okay. Utopia, this is a classic. This is garbage. I read this book thinking it was going to be genius. I'm sorry. Thomas More is a cool guy. He's a saint. He stood up for his faith. Like, I respect that. Utopia is not, I think it's overhyped. But it's interesting because it started the genre of utopia, this utopian idea which is affected today, that we can create this perfect social order. And everybody's been dreaming of utopia since. America was founded by utopianists, I'd say. Thought they were going to create a new paradise, maybe. It's very interesting. Utopia is kind of the foundation of we can create a perfect world order. If we can actually we can create such a system that sin itself, we can save ourselves from sin by creating the perfect environment. And that philosophy is still going on today. It's wreaking havoc in the world. It's a secular, even though he was Catholic, I think it's a very secular philosophy that says that man is merely shaped by his environment. And if we could just tweak everything and just properly discipline and set up the proper environment and the proper stimuli and all this stuff, and that we can perfect mankind. That he will, anyway, it's very interesting. Okay, that's a great book. I love this one, Julius Caesar. I think everybody should read this. You get to see into the mind of a great world leader, a great conqueror. Your kids can actually read the words he wrote. And so this is some third, fourth generation commentary on Julius Caesar and what he thought and his tactics. This is in his own words. Very interesting. It may not all be true, but you get to hear him in his own words. I think it's worth reading. That's another one. Democracy in America. I love this because everybody brainwashes their kids and they think democracy and republicanism is the best, greatest form, and it's what God would have given us. If he was here now, it's what Jesus would have wanted. He would have wanted democracy, and that's why, America is exceptional and stuff. And I like that. Most of the people I follow kind of fall into that crowd that of this American exceptionalism and stuff. And I think in some ways we're exceptional, but I love this book because it's so fat, it's so big. It's written by a Frenchman who probably actually had a lot of sympathy for the American worldview, but he comes over here as a French aristocrat, and he's just analyzing our democracy. And he's making all these predictions of things that are going to go wrong. And it's funny because it's written so long ago, and then you fast forward a few hundred years and like, my God, he nailed it. He nailed it. So there is no perfect form of government because government is always going to be formed by the people. And that's why the utopian worldview falls apart as well. We're not merely shaped by our environment and our education. And too many kids, I think we just kind of brainwash them. What are the advantages of monarchy? What are the advantages of empire? What would be the advantages of a one world government? And I know people who watch this are like, oh, what are the disadvantages of a one world government? What are the disadvantages of democracy and republicanism? I could name them. I love debate. We took speech and debate. I think it's so important, part of a great education, because you were assigned a position. It might be abortion. I think, how can anybody justify abortion? You might get assigned to defend the abortion side. It doesn't mean it's right, but instead of just slicing it, you really have to deal with the heart of the issue. What is the heart of the argument we're dealing with? With democracy, what is the advantage of people having power versus a monarchy having power? It was funny the other day, people thought I was joking, but I asked some of the kids in our homeschool group, I'm like, so what are the advantages of monarchy over democracy? And everybody's like, there are none. Like, no, it was crazy. Like people thought I was joking. Like, what are the advantages? Why did so many people want monarchy? Is it because they were stupid? They didn't understand freedom. They were brainwashed. Why would people not want democracy? Why would people not want women's rights? These are things, it's interesting. Get outside of the bubble. Don't brainwash your kids. It's wrestle with these tough ideas, and then their worldview will be formed in strength. They'll know the flaws of democracy. They'll know the flaws of monarchy, and they'll be able to have a strong worldview that they can defend, if that makes sense. But if your kid can say there's no advantages of monarchy, then they just don't understand government. They just don't understand. Highly recommend this book. Very interesting. I read it as a teenager, not all of it, most of it. And I was just fascinated because it was the first time anybody had ever challenged my worldview that democracy was a godsend, that everything about it was perfect. And anyway, okay. Jane Austen, I love these books. Every girl should read these books. I as a boy read these books. I love the Jane Austen series. This is Sense and Sensibility. I think Pride and Prejudice is better. I love Pride and Prejudice. But again, you have to understand the bias. This is kind of a dangerous classic. This book is promoted as a classic, not because it promotes the manners and the genteel society that I actually like it for, but because it was kind of a mockery of that society. It was showing some of the hypocrisies that was true of the aristocracy. The problem is it doesn't show the benefits of those things. It makes it out to be that manners themselves are kind of foolish and just vain in general. Actually, I don't talk about it in this book. I talk about it in the next book, the importance of manners, and then the third book, the power of etiquette. It's not all just foolishness. It's not all just vanity. Like, there's some order to it. And if you look at the way that they lived back then in the Victorian time and prior to that, and the manners that they promoted, I actually think it wasn't all vanity. I think that there was actually some good thought, some wisdom behind it. And if you look at our age today and the foolishness and the disrespect of our culture, we could probably learn some things by reading Jane Austen and not mocking it, like looking at, what are the advantages of that kind of like high restricted society that they lived in. That's interesting. Plato's Republic. This was always held up to me as like a beacon of wisdom and republicanism. And you read this book. What enlightened me so much about this book is it's promoting a republic, but it's the most extreme form of dictatorship. And this really shocked me because we think republicanism, power of the people and democracy. And you read Plato's Republic, which all these people, these secularists, are trying to return us back to this golden age of Greek and Roman, hierarchy and all this stuff while promoting power to the people. You read this book and you're like, oh my goodness, like these people like Hillary Clinton, they've read this book and and they're playing a power game. And I love the most enlightening part about this book. It's funny because it promotes like original feminism and stuff like that. But the most enlightening part was it talks about how functioning governments will need a heavy dose of deceit to properly govern the people. And people are going to have to believe that there's fair elections, that they have choice, and that they're empowered, and that they're just kind of like unlucky or something. But he literally says, like, you're going to have to lie to the people. It's how it's necessary to lie to the people. So he gives an example of breeding, which is really interesting. This is going Plato's Republic, all the way back thousands of years ago, eugenics. And he talks about how stupid people shouldn't be allowed to breed. The government should be able to control breeding rights. And then they'll have a lottery, so it'll be fair. But the lottery will be rigged so that the dumb people will just think that they're unlucky every time. They're not allowed to breed. Very interesting. And then it's really tyrannical because they talk about how the state, the guardians, will take the children away from the parents, because why should stupid parents be allowed to raise their children? They'll raise up their children for their own selfish desires instead of the desires of the state. And how the children should be taken away from the parents and put into nurseries at a young age so the parents won't even know who their children are. And if you look at modern public education and the return to republicanism and how we have these children at 5 years old, now they want to take them at 3-year-olds and put them into a public school system, and how these children are being raised almost as our own enemies. You look at the worldview of the parents, it's totally polar opposite in many times of the child. The state is hijacking our children and raising them for their purpose. And this isn't some new idea. It goes back to Plato's Republic. And again, what struck me is it's a republic, and they're promoting freedom and liberty to mask their tyranny. I wonder if any of that's applicable today. So, great book. Every kid should read it, but be very careful. It's a dangerous book because it is wise. There is a lot of truth mixed with the untruth. So, great book. Okay, this one's going to be really controversial. I'm afraid someday, if our company blows up, they're going to have this picture. So I don't even want to show you the book because it'll be like a picture. Oh, he's on his site promoting this book. I'm just going to show it to you this way, okay? I read this book when I was, 18 or 19. This is Mein Kampf. Mein Kampf, of course, written by Adolf Hitler, who we all know is a genocidal maniac, crazy guy who just came to power because he fooled the people or something. And he came to power in Germany. He led the whole world in this crazy war. But thankfully, good triumphed over the evil, satanic, genocidal maniac in Adolf Hitler. Okay, that's a cool worldview. And maybe it's a proper conclusion, but it doesn't help your children understand what happened. World War I and World War II are tied together. They're actually tied back 300 years worth of world that is boiling up. It's been boiling up for a long time. And if you think World War I was a fluke, it was just some genocidal maniac who got into power and then led to this war, you will repeat history. You can't learn from history if you're learning false history. It may be fun and easy because he's our enemy to just denigrate him, but not everything Hitler said is false, and that's really important. Just because somebody is evil, just because somebody tells lies, doesn't mean they always tell lies, doesn't mean everything they say is untrue. And if you believe that, you're already going down the wrong path. If you believe that, it's like people who hate Trump. And if Trump pet a puppy dog, they'd be like, he petted the puppy dog the wrong way. They hate him. And it's to their own disadvantage. They can't see any good in him. They can't see anything he does is right. If he went left, he should have gone right. If he went right, he should have gone left. I think some people did that to Obama. I was certainly no fan, but not every single word out of Obama's mouth was wrong, was it? I mean, let's think, okay, what caused World War II? I promise you, it wasn't some crazy madman. And if it was, why did they elect him? Oh, because he's crazy, he failed, democracy failed. And no, you have no idea. You have no idea what was going on in Germany at that time. You have no idea. 100% of people have no idea. And let's not pretend that we were the righteous war against Adolf Hitler because we sided with Joseph Stalin. We sided with Stalin. If you think Hitler is bad because he killed 6 million people, how could Joseph Stalin be any better? Didn't he kill a lot of people too? So it's not that black and white, is it? Why did we side with Stalin in the war against Hitler? We say, well, Hitler's super, super evil. Okay, but we sided with super, super evil to beat super, super evil. Those two were already going to war with each other. We could have stayed out of the war. So see, I'm not saying we should have stayed out of the war. What I'm saying is it's not that simple. If you want kids to have a great education, they need to be able to study and read the truth for what it is. There's a whole lot of truth in Mein Kampf. What is true? What is false? Some of Hitler's grievances were absolutely valid. The communists, most people don't know, the communists already overthrown Germany. Okay, the communists, the people who overthrew the Soviet Union, Russia, found the Soviet, they had already come to Germany and overthrown it. Okay, and during the same World War I. People don't know that. So how did Hitler come to power? Well, the communists had an insurrection. They overthrew the country, which is why Germany lost World War I, and and the chancellor had to abdicate, or the Kaiser, which is like the Tsar, the king. He has to abdicate, and the communists take over the country for a very short period of time. And the soldiers, like Hitler, infantry soldiers, rise up, stage a counter coup, kill the communists who overthrew Germany, but they keep the republic. And then, of course, Hitler's rise to power, and Hitler's hatred towards certain people. It's not just blanket bigotism. Like there is some truth to what he's saying, even if his solution was wrong, even if it wasn't totally. Do you see what I'm saying? Like, you have to understand the cause. You can't just dismiss it as this crazy guy, or your kids aren't learning anything from history. Okay, so I actually recommend this. This is a guy who was a major leader, a major player in a major world. World War II changed the world forever. It changed the order of the world. It's a huge pivotal event. You have an opportunity to look inside of him and see the truth, and then see the evil, and see both of it. And I think kids should understand it for themselves. I really hate when they just dismiss him as a crazy lunatic. You're missing history. It's not that simple. Okay, there's a lot more going on. It's going on today. And if we don't understand the root cause of what caused World War I, it wasn't Hitler. Hitler was maybe a symptom. But why did people want Hitler? Why were people at that boiling point? What was going on in the world? If you don't understand that, then you're just going to think that, well, he was an anomaly. He was a crazy, evil guy. That will never happen again. It will happen again. It's already happening. It's repeating itself. It's coming. And it's a good book. I recommend it. You could say it's an evil book. It's a powerful book. It's dangerous. I would not let my little kids read this. I wouldn't let my kids read it until they form their faith. They know who they are, and they can see truth from untruth, and I'd still read it with them. But you don't have to, but it's interesting. This is a good one. This is really good. This is Simone de Beauvoir. I love this book. You could say she's the antithesis of everything that I believe in. She's an atheistic feminist. I love this book, though, because it was so enlightening to me. Again, I read this when I was like 19 or 20, and I was under the impression that, feminism was about equality and voting rights. And you read this book, and you're like, oh my goodness. Feminism is merely communism. And these are all going to be linked together, these isms and these movements and stuff, but it's purely communism, and there's absolute contempt for women. It's contempt. They hate women. They see women and motherhood as a waste of life. They think that they're a parasite to the state because they're fed and clothed by the working men, and they want women to get into the workforce and be productive members of society. It is part of the communist capitalist movement which swept the world. It's closely tied to economics. Feminism is all about economics, has very little to do with equality or valuing women or appreciating them. So it was really an enlightening read. Like, wow, how come no people understand that this came out of the French Revolution, that the insanity and the wickedness of the French Revolution, and these people just are seething with hatred for traditional femininity, not masculinity. They want women to be like the men. And very, very fascinating read. I've read it. Again, this is a dangerous book. I don't recommend to kids until they're older, but this is a part of a great education, wrestling with the evil in the world and being able to triumph over it. We have to seek the snake out and cut its head off into the grass so our children don't get bit by it. It's not enough to run and hide and put our kids inside every time we see it. Like, seek the snake out, cut its head off. At the same time, maybe keep the skin if it's useful. There are things in this book that'll be interesting. That it's not all untruth. Even in this book, this terrible book, there are things in here that's interesting. There's a lot of truth that we have to deal with in history to understand that it wasn't merely a fight of good and evil. Like, some of Hitler's adversaries were just as evil. You look at Joseph Stalin, he was dealing with that evil, and he may have, well, I'm going to say he didn't handle the situation right, But that doesn't mean that the roots of some of the complaints of what he said isn't true, if that makes sense. So we have to wrestle with that. Some of you guys are going to unsubscribe. That's fine. A great education isn't propaganda. It's just not. If you want to propagandize your kid, that's fine. But you'll be like every other kid when they go out into the world. They're going to be wrestled with these things, and they're going to get led astray because you've never wrestled with them. It's not merely keeping your kid inside of a bubble, in my opinion. Okay. This is another one. We talk about classics. This isn't for your kids unless your kid wants to be an animator. So I don't know if some of your kids, I know some of your kids want to be illustrators. I talk about that in this book. It's a dangerous career, very hard, very hard. But if that's your kid's passion, their dream, they need to start early. This is a great book. This is a classic, but not for everybody. This is the Illusion of Life, Disney animation. This is like the Bible of Disney animation. Fascinating book, and of course I've read a lot of it because I am an illustrator. I would love to someday do animations for Blue Manor Academy. So that's a classic that's relevant to my career choice. It wouldn't be for yours if they want to be a doctor, right? So, but there might be classics that are geared towards doctors. I really don't know. So anyway, okay, so I introduced you some of the classics. I want you to know that just because people lie too, like you, oh well, he's a liar, so how can we believe what he wrote? Well, not a person who lies mostly tells the truth. If your kid lies to you, he probably tells you 100 truths, and then he tells you 1 or 2 lies a day. So not everything that a liar says is untrue. Even if what he says isn't true, let's say he's lying. Hitler's lying in this book. It doesn't matter because he reflects a worldview that we have to understand. We have to say, okay, it's untrue, but this is where they're coming from. This is what they believe is true. This is why they're led to these extremes. And now we understand the origins of the war. And I don't think that World War I or II originated with Germany. I don't think Hitler is responsible for World War I. He may have been the leader of his movement, but there was something else underlying that bubbled this up. There's a reason they elected this guy into office, and there's a reason that many of them were loyal to the end to him. And you could say it's based on falsehood, that's fine, but you have to understand what's underlying. Conservatives could look at liberals and say, well, they're just evil. They're just evil. Okay, maybe, but what is their worldview? They certainly don't know that they're evil. They certainly think that they're working towards a positive worldview. What is it? You can't just dismiss people and say that they're crazy. People aren't crazy. They're given a rational mind by God, liberal and conservative, Christian and atheist. What is the underlying worldview, the linchpin of the argument, I'd say? You have to get to the linchpin. You can't dismiss it or it'll come back and bite you. Okay, good books. All right, and guys, I don't consider these good books, by the way. I don't consider Mein Kampf a good book. I consider it a classic that needs to be read. It needs to be wrestled with. So today we had 2 classes of books kids should be reading. Classics are the dangerous books. I would say that they're the books that changed and shaped history. The Bible is a great classic. It shaped history. So you read the Bible, but you also have to read these other books like Plato's Republic that shaped history, wrestle with them. So that's one category of books your kids should be reading. The second is good books. Most of the books my kids read, especially at an early age, are good, wholesome books that reinforce our faith and our values. Hey, Sharon, I was just talking about a great class. We're talking about classics. I was talking about a book I think your daughter would like. Maybe she wouldn't. I know her art's a little different. Maybe she's not interested in animation, but this is a classic in the genre of art. This is The Illusion of Life. It was written by Frank Thomas and Ollie Johnston. These are famous Disney illustrators. Huge, thick. It's like the Bible of animation and art. It's so good. For an artist, not for everybody. Okay, so 2 classes of books. Classics, which I write about in this book, the importance of reading them. Not because you want your kids to adopt Hitler's worldview or Stalin's worldview or Simon de Beauvoir's worldview or Plato's worldview. I don't want that for my kids. That's exactly why we're reading it. I don't want them to go to college someday and read Plato's Republic and be like, wow, that's really smart, and just adopt that worldview and dismiss their faith. I want them to wrestle with this and defeat it so that when they go out into the world, they're prepared for battle, okay? So please don't go out there and say, why, that guy, he's promoting kids reading Mein Kampf. And I'm not saying kids should read Mein Kampf ever, little kids. But at some point, they should wrestle with the players. They should read the books written by Stalin. Like, he was a major player. What did he say? Or the books written by Hitler or Candid or those. It's not, we're not promoting that, but we can't hide from it. Sharon, you're coming in late. I don't want you to just hear me say, read Mein Kampf. That's not what I'm saying. Okay? That's not what I'm saying. I'm saying wrestle with those ideas, do battle, and defeat them while your children are under your roof. They have to be prepared for that. I hope that makes sense. Okay. All right, well, I'm about done rambling. This is an amazing book. Every kid should read it. This is Democracy in America. It's a tough book. Your kids get bonus points. If your kids are reading these books at 14, 15, 16, you need to let them know, This is not part of a normal education. This isn't to check off the list. Like, you are great. You are great if you're reading this book. But let your kids know too that this is just not normal. Like, if they read Democracy in America, they're a hero. They're well above and beyond. They'll have an understanding that other people, a wisdom and understanding that other people won't have. If you read Mein Kampf, it's written by a very evil man, but you'll have an understanding of history and human nature that nobody else will. You'll understand what the mind was that went to war with the world in Adolf Hitler. If that makes sense. Utopia, classic because of the genre. He created his own genre of utopia, a perfect society that we could someday organize, create, and everybody would be perfect. We've been trying to create utopia. World War I and World War II were rooted in utopian fantasies. We know utopia will be heaven, that it can't be created on earth because every man is born with sin in his heart. It's not environment, it's not mindset, it's a spiritual battle every single time. I have a new baby, he'll be doing war, spiritual warfare. You see what I'm saying? Everyone's a battle. Okay, War and Peace, just a fantastic book. Great writing. Wish I'd read it in Russian. Dangerous a little bit, yeah. It promotes some worldviews I don't necessarily agree with, but beautiful, powerful book, worth reading. I already told you why this is important. Your kids shouldn't read it unless they want to be a soldier, but really illuminates your worldview. The American Revolution, it's not that simplistic stupidity that we were taught. The players weren't. It wasn't David and Goliath. I'll tell you that. It was. Gosh, I would say it was Goliath versus Goliath. If you really want to know what the Revolutionary War was about, it was bankers and kings. Okay, bankers and kings. The French Revolution, bankers and kings. It wasn't peasants and kings like they want you to believe. It was bankers and kings. And the bankers and merchants were like, we're done. We're taking down the kings. And they did. They took them down in Russia. They took them down in Spain. They took them down in Mexico. They took them everywhere. Okay, the bankers triumphed. And now we live in a capitalist republic because the bankers triumphed. That's what really happened. The peasants, you could say, were pawns in the games. Bankers and kings went to war. So anyway, fascinating. But you don't even know what I'm talking about. You're like, well, George Washington wasn't a banker. Yeah, neither was Napoleon. Napoleon was a nobody. He was funded. He was promoted. And when they were done with him, they put him on a little island and dismissed him. William of Orange, the great conqueror. William of Orange was nobody. He was nobody until a banker gave him such a grand army. It was bigger than what James had in England. Twice like James' size, huge armada. You think like William of Orange couldn't help but conquer. It was the bankers' war. The bankers were going to take down King James, and they succeeded. And then from there, they're going to go and take down, topple all the kings in the world. And they did it. It's really a fascinating story. It's much more fascinating than the history, I think, than the history we're taught. And it's true. Great book. This is Julius Caesar. Again, these are all mostly books I wouldn't have little kids read. These are books for older kids. But man, you can actually hear Julius Caesar in his own words discussing the events. You can see his mindset. If we want our kids to be great world leaders someday, they need to tap into the thinking. I mean, it's really powerful. It's not some third-rate professor of no-name university telling you the genius of Julius Caesar, trying to describe it. I'm sorry, that doesn't count. We'll go straight to the source. Julius Caesar will speak in his own words. That's powerful. Great insight. So, okay, guys, well, I'm done. Hopefully, that's just a discussion of books. These aren't hokey. These are real. That's why they go a little bit longer. This isn't sloganeering or law of attraction mumbo jumbo. This is a serious education. Please don't rush out and buy these books for your kids. If you have not, let me just say this. You take a book like Mein Kampf, written by Adolf Hitler. Okay? You take a book like that. Your kid should not be reading that book if you hadn't read that book. You have better have read it, digested it before you introduce it to your kid. However, I would say that the underlying philosophy of this book, of Mein Kampf, written by Adolf Hitler, is still alive and well in the world. And so you have to read it, you have to prepare your children for it. I don't even have the Communist Manifesto over here. Communist Manifesto, you can't just ignore it. That philosophy is engulfing our society. It's becoming more popular than the Christian philosophy. You have to wrestle with it. But don't just hand your kid the Communist Manifesto and be like, hey, read this, tell me what you think. Like, read it carefully. Take them by the hand. Read it ahead of time. If you want to become educated yourself, read it ahead of time and then discuss it with your kids. Prepare your kids for battle so they know what the enemy's arguments are so they're not overcome by it. because the Communist Manifesto, we can say, oh, they're a bunch of crazy, whatever, leftists. I'm sorry. There's an underlining philosophy that's very popular, very attractive with people. You better understand what that is. You can't just dismiss it as crazy. You can't dismiss Hitler as crazy. These weren't crazy people. They may have been evil people, but they weren't crazy. And something that they offered attracted the masses. And if you're not careful, it can attract your children too. That's why we're doing battle with it. You guys understand that? I don't want to see someday, if our company becomes big, and then he promoted these evil books. I'm not promoting them. I'm telling you to do battle with them when your kids are ready. And that might be when they're adults. Okay. Or teens or something. So, all right, guys. Well, I'm out. Thank you guys so much for joining me. Hopefully you got something out of this. Guys, if you have questions, you probably do. List them below. I'm not shying away from these controversial topics. This is a closed group. I'm just going to talk to you the truth, raw. But if you have questions, please, if you have misunderstandings, if you came at the end and you're like, wait, he's recommending that book, please watch the whole video and then ask questions if you don't understand something. I certainly don't promote these worldviews, but I certainly want to understand them. So thank you guys so much. I will talk to you soon. And remember, not on Friday now, but we will be coming back every Wednesday. And then just so you know, we had a baby. I don't know if I announced that or not a few days ago. So that's changed our lives. Baby number 7. I will say this. You wonder, does it ever get old? It doesn't. It's always a miracle. It's just so amazing to have a kid. So this is baby number 7. And I'm probably more emotional for this one. I don't know. I have older kids now. I know what babies become. They're so precious. And just so you know, baby number 7 is as precious as baby number 1. It's beautiful. It's always, kids are wonderful. All right, guys. Socialism is infiltrating our youth. Yes, Sam, it is infiltrating the youth. Absolutely. That's why our kids need to be prepared for it. But they need to understand what socialism is. I would say that 100% of Americans do not understand what socialism is. And that's why it's so terrifying. It's not the philosophy. Oh, geez. I don't even want to get into socialism, but this is a mystery. When I wrote Revealing School, I basically traced the roots of school back to communism. But I didn't understand what communism was or where it came from. And I read the Communist Manifesto, and I remember, this little book, inspired this worldwide revolution. And then I stumbled on this, anomaly. I'm like, wait a second. Socialism is rooted in the French Revolution, and the French Revolution was pivotal. The same players were pivotal in the American Revolution. And wait a second. It's all funded by bankers. And man, my head was blown. I couldn't understand. Why are capitalists promoting socialism? Even today, you have to understand, you're like, oh, socialism is easy, capitalism is good. It's not that simple. You take a guy like George Soros, a supreme capitalist promoting socialism. It doesn't make sense if that's your worldview. It's left and it's right. You don't even know what's going on. Why would a supreme capitalist be promoting socialism? It's a riddle you have to solve. You think he wants all of his wealth taken? He could just give it up. You think it's hypocrisy. That's what we think is, oh, they're hypocrites. Look, they live in their mansions, but they promote, they don't promote capitalism, which they live off of. They promote socialism. Yeah, they do. It's a consistent worldview, but most people don't understand the game. And gosh, I should open that can of worms, but someday I will. In the final book of this series, the next one is going to be character. Then we're going to have, I think I'm going to call it power now. Not the noble way, but power. It's okay for Christians to be powerful people. And that's really what that book is. It's talking about how to create powerful families and powerful wealth and powerful speech and etiquette, the things that elevate man and give him more influence. And we need Christians to have that. And then the final book's going to be the enemy. And that's where I'm going to show you, I'm going to connect these things in a way that you've never heard it before. Never heard it before. And then you'll finally understand why capitalists are promoting socialism. And you're going to think well, capitalists are all about money, so they're trying to make money off the system. No, they're not all about money. That's also a myth. You wish they were all about money, because then you say, well, America has this huge Christian market, so Hollywood would be making Christian movies for us. But they don't. They don't. It's not purely capitalism to them. And remember, Hollywood is the supreme elitist, rich, wealthy. They live in these mansions. They roll out red carpets for themselves. They're the epitome of the aristocracy, but they promote socialism and the power to the little people and stuff. And you're like, dude, we think it's hypocrisy. It's not. It's a new world order. We'll put it that way. It's consistent. It makes sense. Once you understand who Hollywood is, where they came from, once you understand who these bankers are, you'll understand what's going on. You'll understand why they hate Christianity. Capitalist countries and communist countries traditionally hate Christianity. We live in a capitalist American society. We've been hating on Christianity for a long time. They've been chipping away at our foundation for a long time, even before socialism was swelling. And it's not about capitalism or communism, I promise you. It's the same people. And once you understand who they are, it actually makes sense. I don't want to ramble, but just give you one idea, okay? I'm not going to open it. It'll be another like 3 hours. I could really talk about it for 3 or 4 hours. It's really fascinating. I'll say this, if you want to start digging no, I'm not going to do it. You can read the last book when it comes out. If you guys really want to know more about history, true history, I'm happy to teach it at some point. You know, this is a private group, and I'll let it have it. And you're going to be shocked whether you're a liberal or conservative. You'll be shocked because it's neither. You don't even know. Like, gosh, like Ronald Reagan. When I was younger in college, like Ronald Reagan was like the iconic conservative. And we all love Ronald Reagan. We didn't know anything that he did, but he was one of us. And if you just get back to the good old days of Ronald Reagan, you know, you just realize like you've been totally hoodwinked. Ronald Reagan was not a conservative. Ronald Reagan was not one of us. He certainly wasn't a Christian. Ronald Reagan followed the Soviet Union's suit. Okay, Ronald Reagan was the first governor to promote abortion in his state. He was governor. Think about this. Ronald Reagan was he was a union boss, a Hollywood guy, union boss. First governor to legalize abortion in his state before Roe versus Wade. First governor to legalize no-fault divorce. These were all iconic tenets of communism. This came straight from the Soviet Union. As soon as the Soviets came to power, they're like, legalize abortion. They hate marriage. That's the other thing. You read this feminist manifesto, Simon de Beauvoir, you realize, oh, they're communists and they hate marriage. They hate family, okay? So the first thing, why is Ronald Reagan this conservative? Why is he following the communist lead? Very strange. Ronald Reagan, he runs on putting the first woman on the Supreme Court. I thought we just promote people not on their gender, but why is he promoting that? Oh, Ronald Reagan, he legalized 20 million illegals, okay? That's not considered a conservative thing today, so it's the narrative isn't right. And you can say, well, it's good he did it, you can say it's bad he did it, but there's something underlying that's wrong with the narrative. And if you really want to know what's going on with the illegals, okay, what Ronald Reagan did was give California supreme power, so many, 20 million, that's way more people than live in Idaho. So he gives them, they get all those electorals, and they're doing this in New York, and this is a power game, and it's way deeper than what you're following. And it's not really, this isn't all like about education, but it is actually, because we have to understand, like, the final book is the enemy. You have to understand the enemy. You have to understand how they're targeting your children, and you have to understand that they're winning. They're winning masses and masses of children. Someday I'll tell you about the Janissaries. It's a powerful lesson for today, because it's going to happen. If we don't get control of our own children back, if we don't get them into our camp, they will be the ones that wage this crusade against us, against our faith and our family and our values. It'll be our own. So I guess that's why it is relevant. It is important to understand what's going on. I always tell people I'm not a Christian. I'm not a communist. I'm not a capitalist. I'm a Christian. And that means that's it. I don't have to tell you where I line up politically. I'm a Christian. That's my worldview. That's all I'll say today. But more will certainly be coming. And I promise you, it's not anything you've ever read before. It's nothing that I've read. It's not like I read somebody else's book or I saw some video on YouTube and I'm here to report it. This is studying history, and this is just being overwhelmed by the truth. You're just like, oh my God, like Ronald Reagan, like it blew my mind. Wait, he's not a Christian? Wait, he promoted abortion? Wait, he legalized all these people? Like, wait, he promoted no-fault divorce? Like that was exactly what the communists were doing in Russia that was so outrageous. Who is Ronald Reagan? Who is Ronald Reagan? Who is George Bush? Who are these people? They're connected. And I talk about it being prep schools, like, oh, prep schools rule the world. I'm getting you closer. It's true. Prep schools rule the world. There's a community within inside of that. I'm just getting you closer. And someday you'll know who these people are, and you'll know why they are waging war on Christendom. And that's it. Thanks, guys, so much. I'll talk about it some other day. Thank you guys for tuning in. Love all the new members. Ask me questions. Read these books. This book is great. This is a great starting point. Revealing School Education. So powerful. People love it. And it only gets better from here. The next book that's coming is a character. It's more powerful for your children. Power is going to be powerful. And then, of course, the enemy. We want to raise champions who know the enemy, who can see the enemy and destroy the enemy, metaphorically, of our faith and our families and our values. So, all right, guys, I'm done. Thank you guys for watching. Talk to you soon.